In this video, we'll show you how to cast off. We're using Hayfield Bonus DK and you'll use the yarn and needles in your pattern. Casting off is how we finish our knitting, and I'm going to show us how to cast off in knit stitch, stocking stitch and in rib stitch. We're going to start off with the knit stitch. So to work our cast off, we want to decrease our stitches. So how we do this, finishing them off, is I'm going to come in with my knit stitch and I'm going to knit the first stitch and then I'm going to knit the second stitch. And the act of casting off is then taking our left hand needle and picking up our first stitch. So getting those at the end of the needle so it's easy, picking up our first stitch and pulling it over the top of our second stitch, reducing the stitch. So we're left with one stitch on our right hand needle. I'm now going to work another knit stitch, coming round, pulling through, taking that off my needle. So I've got two, and then we want to repeat the process of taking our needle under, hooking that first stitch, holding our tension in our hand so we make sure that we're not pulling that second stitch off. And we use that to come through, lifting that first stitch over our second stitch, binding off our edge. So I'm going to do another knit stitch. We're left with two, and we're going to take that first one and pull it over the top of our second. Repeating that action, you can start to see that we're finishing off the edge of our knitting. Creating a nice neat edge, casting off our stitches. You then work that away along your row or for how many stitches your pattern asks for. I'm now going to show you this technique using purl stitch. To cast off in purl stitch, we want to follow a very similar action, but instead of using the knit stitch, this time we're going to use purl. So you want to make sure that your yarn is on the front, not the back of your work, and we're going to come in, we're going to purl those first two stitches, purl our first stitch, purl our second stitch, and then we're going to follow the action by taking our first stitch and lifting it over the top of our second stitch, leaving one stitch on our right hand needle. I'm going to repeat that, doing one more purl stitch, having two loops on our right hand needle and then taking the first one over the top of the second one. Purling, and then taking that first one over the top, casting off our edge nice and neatly. I'm now going to go through the process in a rib stitch. Working our cast off in rib, I'm using my 1x1 rib, which starts with a knit stitch. So I'm going to work my first stitch in a knit, and then I'm going to come and do my second stitch in a purl. And again, what we have to remember when casting off in a rib is the same technique for when we were doing rib stitch, which you can see in the rib stitch video, which is taking our yarn from the back, bring it through to the front before we do our purl. We work our second stitch in purl, and then we want to take that first stitch on our needle over the top of our second stitch, locking it in place. I'm then going to go back to a knit, so I remember to take my yarn from the front to the back so it's ready in the knit position, do my knit stitch. Then once I've got my two stitches on my needle, I take the first one and bring it over the top of the second one. Remembering to come from the back to the front before I do my purl, doing my purl stitch, pulling that off so I've got two loops on my needle, bringing my yarn to the back and taking that first one over the top, casting off my edge in the rib stitch pattern. And that's how you cast off your knit work in 3 different methods, using the knit stitch, the purl stitch, and working a cast off in rib. Practice until you're confident and then head to surdal.com for more stitches, beginner kits, patterns and yarn.